Welcome to another episode of Whitetail Rendezvous, coming to you 6 days a week as we interview whitetail experts and hear their traditions and personal stories of the hunt. Learn more about the latest gear, discover proven tips, and the latest strategies so you can make your next hunt a success. Now, here's your host, Bruce Hutchin.
Welcome to Whitetail Rendezvous Podcast with your host, Bruce Hutchin, episode number 257.
Welcome to another episode of Whitetail Rendezvous. This is your host, and then I welcome back to the show Dr. Ken Nordberg. Ken hails out of Minnesota, and he has a deer camp 3 miles south of the Canadian border in wilderness, folks. And there's a lot of wolves. There's a lot of competition for the bucks, but they're shooting deer that are over 3.5 years old, 4.5 years old. That's their target. Yes, they will take a 2.5-year-old deer, but they like to take the big bucks, and their crew's been doing it for a long time. He's going to be talking about 3 things: Whitetail Tracks, blinds for whitetail, and hunting mature bucks the old-fashioned way. And he does it really simple. They put in hours and hours, but his formula is basically really simple. They find a track, they get ahead of that track during the November season, and then they intercept that buck when he's coming looking for a doe. So they call it railroad tracking. So it's a fun show. So, and I'm sure, like me, you're going to pick up a lot of information from Dr. Ken Nordberg. Hey, listeners, don't forget to text 33444 Food Plot for your free Food Plot ebook. Welcome to another episode of Whitetail Rendezvous. This is your host, and on today's show, we get Dr. Ken Nordberg. Ken hails out of Minnesota, and hey, folks, he just released on Amazon and Apple iBooks a 2016 Pocket Guide to Whitetail Tracks, Fall and Winter. Dr. Nordberg, hey, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for asking me. I always enjoy talking to you.
Well, I appreciate that. Let's start the show right up. And, folks, by the way, this is going to be a 2-part show. The first part, we're going to talk about whitetail tracks and begin talking about blinds for whitetails. And then we're going to end Part 2, we're going to have finishing up on blinds for whitetail and then hunting mature whitetails. So that's what you're in store for the next couple episodes. So, Dr. Ken, let's jump right into why you wrote Whitetail Tracks, and if somebody reads it, how it's going to help them.
Okay, well, I've been at this for 40-some years, 45 years, almost 46 years. When I first started introducing the idea that you can identify various classes of whitetails by the lengths of their tracks. And the longer I do it, the more I realize that this is probably the only thing in whitetail hunting that can actually make hunting easy. Think of all the things we do, all the preparation we go, all the things we buy to try to improve our luck. But nothing can do it better than whitetail deer signs, especially traps. And for one simple reason. Let's say you and I are walking in the woods right now, and then we come to this deer trail. Here's a deer trail, and we look at it, and holy cow, there's a lot of really fresh tracks here. They're sharply defined. They're just nice, clean, fresh tracks in the trail. Well, what does that tell you? This is a trail whitetails are using right now. They've used it today, probably this morning, maybe just a few hours ago. And chances are, as long as they don't become alarmed by a hunter or something else in the meanwhile, they're going to use it again this evening, later today, and tomorrow morning probably, until, they suddenly realize that, hey, there's a hunter hanging around here. But if you hunt anywhere else, you're just... you're using luck, and luck is poor. It doesn't add much success as a whitetail hunter. When you get one, you say you're lucky, but how often does it happen for the average hunter to take a really nice buck, one for the wall? it takes about 30 years or more before you get one or even two. By using fresh tracks, you can get that down to one every year, or maybe 2 years, maybe 8 out of 10 years, something like that, which is pretty fantastic buck hunting. And
okay. Hold on. Now, how do I know? We're on a deer trail, we see a track, but talk to me specifically about the large buck, the mature buck, the buck we're looking for over 4.5 years old.
Okay.
Differentiate that from the does and the fawns and the yearling bucks and the smaller guys. How do we do that?
Well, first of all, I want to mention that, the farther north you go in the United States, continental in the United States, the bigger the deer are. Up where I hunt, up close to the Canadian border, our average dominant breeding buck will weigh about 305 pounds. And when down in Texas, I spent 18 years studying whitetails down in Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. Down there, a big buck is maybe 125 pounds. And a deer that size is not going to have as large a track as one in Minnesota, northern Minnesota. But I tell you, the way I've done a lot of research with that, too. I have some simple formulas that I use, I have put in my book, that tells you how to figure out what the sizes of tracks should be where you hunt. Now, like Texas bucks, those big ones may only weigh 125 pounds, but a lot of Texas bucks grow antlers that will rival the largest found anywhere in the United States. So, but anyway, track size here in Minnesota, just for an example, our adult does that are anywhere from 2 to 14 years of age will have tracks no larger than 3 1/8 inch in length. That's just the track, that isn't included the dew claw impressions you see in soft dirt and snow. But anyway, 3 1/8 is about as long as they can be. Now, yearling bucks will have the same size. They're about the same weight. Our yearling does will go 140, 150 pounds, and so will our yearling bucks. Now, anything smaller than that is a yearling doe or a fawn. Now, anytime you find tracks that are larger, say 3 1/2 inches to 4 is that's a big buck in our country. You're looking at the tracks of a big buck. And so when we found those fresh tracks there, and we put a ruler down there and measure it, holy cow, this thing is 4 inches or 3 7/8, something like that. That's a big guy. If you get that one, you're probably going to put him on the wall. You're going to be pretty proud of him, even if he doesn't make the record book. But that's
now, how do I measure that? Hold on, Jerry. Okay, I don't have a ruler. I don't carry a ruler. I got a bullet. I'm shooting a 30-aught.
Well, if you want to do that, I don't know what the length of that bullet is, but it's easy to carry a little ruler or a small steel tape, one a 10-footer, or a little steel tape. That's standard hunting equipment in my deer camp, and we always have one in our pocket if we need it. Although my boys and I have been doing this so many years that we're pretty darn accurate just looking at it. We recognize, oh, man, that's a big buck for sure. We don't put a ruler on there very often anymore, which is kind of important in this new hunting method that'll be introduced in my 10th edition of my Whitetail Hunter's Almanac.
Okay, let's take a little break here. Now, it seems I've never carried a ruler in my pack. I use a bullet and 30-06 or 280.
Get yourself a little steel tape and just. Okay,
why do I need to do that? Help me out here. We're going to transfer some knowledge.
Look at it now. Let's say there's a track there in that trail, and that track is 3 1/8 inch long. Well, if it's 3 5/8. That's a 2.5-year-old buck here in Minnesota. That's not much of a difference. And for the guy hasn't got a lot of experience recognizing lengths of deer tracks, just that little bit of difference between tracks, like a 1/4 inch, can make the difference between whether you're hunting a mature doe or a 2.5-year-old buck. So, these track sizes, they might differ by only a quarter inch or more. But if you don't know for sure, the only way to be sure is to have a ruler handy.
Now, you just said that a half an inch difference between a doe and a 2.5-year-old buck?
No, a quarter inch.
Quarter inch. No,
yeah.
That's pretty finite. No,
that's why you need the ruler.
Now, what about dew claws, and what about how they drag? I've seen back.
Yeah, back when I first started doing this, I started measuring tracks back in 1970. And I kind of like the idea. Here in Minnesota, we have a lot of snow during the deer season, and dew claws are almost always visible. And I always thought a longer track measurement would be more accurate. And so for years, I was teaching hunters to use a tip-through dew claw measurement. But I've been getting letters over the years, and people would say, where I hunt, we don't see dew claws very often in the tracks, and I've done some work down in Georgia and South Carolina. I did, and Virginia, and a lot of other southern states, and like in Texas, where you don't see the dew claws. So I thought, well, that's kind of a disadvantage if somebody has to figure out that has to say, well, on the average, dew claw, the tip measurement is a third longer than just a track measurement, but that's some more figuring to do. So to make it easier nowadays, I just go with hoof only, and that's plenty accurate. You'll rarely go wrong when you use that measurement.
Now, what about that drag mark that bucks make and does don't make? What about that?
I got several photos of that, and bucks doing the dragging in my new little book. It's a 95-page book on Amazon, and it's only $4.99. But boy, is that a valuable book! But you're going to see all kinds of drag marks in snow, and a buck that does that is smelling the pheromone being released by a doe in heat, either from her tracks or airborne. He's smelling that, and that creates an automatic response in antlered bucks. And they start walking stiff-legged, and the stiff-legged walk creates these track-to-track drag marks in snow. And so that's what that's about. Usually, if the doe is in sight, or he's close to it, or he's accompanying the doe, his head will be down. When he smells that, his mouth will be open. When that odor gets into his mouth, there's a little orifice in the roof of his mouth behind his upper. Well, I shouldn't say teeth. They don't have upper front teeth, but it's just behind that ridge where the teeth would be. And that somehow stimulates an area in the brain, and they just can't help it. And then they start acting sometimes like they're swallowing air, and to get more of that odor. And then they respond by, their head usually goes down low, more parallel with the top of their body, and their mouth is doing this silly swallowing, and they're walking stiff-legged, and they're almost like they're in a zombie. Yeah, they're so affected by that. Now, that's what they'll be doing when they smell a doe. So we have taken lots of bucks over the years. When we found some tracks, my boys, when they were young, they learned to call those railroad tracks. And
railroad tracks?
Railroad tracks. They look like railroads. Anyway, when they come into camp, they're smiling and they say, "Dad, I found some railroad tracks." But what that means is, a buck is with, or he's smelling a doe in estrus. And does in estrus or in heat, they keep up their daily routines. They feed when whitetails normally feed, in the morning and the evening. And so when we find railroad tracks, we figure the nearest whitetail feeding area where we know a doe, one or more does is feeding, is the place to hunt. And you got to do it quick. You can't. If you're in a tree stand, you're kind of stuck. You aren't going to be able to take advantage of that. So we hunt at ground level with stools. That's one of the main reasons we do that. So we can respond right now. we'll head from downwind or crosswind to that nearest feeding area and sit down on our stools hidden in natural cover and wait.
And we're going to talk about using blinds later, folks. But Jerry's on a roll here because he's sharing. How many years of deer hunting do you have under your belt?
71 years.
So we're getting 71 years, and yeah, there's a lot of information out there, and there's a lot of great people sharing. But I love getting with Dr. Nordberg because they set a camp up northern Minnesota, and he really understands what bucks are doing. Now that's in northern Minnesota, and he's got snow on the ground. But if you watch a buck's track, and you got leaves on the ground, or you got some mud, or you got some sand, or just depending on the terrain, you can see exactly what he's talking about sans snow, without the snow on the ground. So, Jerry, I just wanted to throw something in there and talk to me about the railroad tracks. Why do they call them railroad tracks?
Well, it was my sons decided when they were young. They started their deer hunting at age 11. And one of the kids, my son Ken, he decided they looked like railroad tracks. So that's what we've called them ever since. But anyway, what I was about to say is that when you find those, you have to remember that individual does are only in heat for 24 to 26 hours. Then they're done. If they don't get bred, then they'll be in heat again 28 days later. Actually, there's 3 different breeding periods in the whitetail rut, and most hunters don't realize that. But anyway,
okay, let's talk about that. Just stop right there, because that's a big buck nugget.
I will do that.
Big buck nugget.
Well, this is important. I will do that. I want to finish what I was saying, though. That means you got to react quickly when you find railroad tracks. I mean, because if you decide to do it tomorrow or the next day, that's too late. You got to get there now. No messing around. And if it's early morning and you find them, you get to that feeding area right now. Get there right now from downwind or crosswind. Otherwise, you're missing the boat. And of course, if you're in a tree stand way over there somewhere, and that's where you're going to go, and that's you don't even think about such thing. You're missing the boat. You're missing one of the best chances there is to take a big buck, a dominant breeding buck. Okay, now back to what was the question again?
Oh, the question was that here you are, and you're seeing it, and you're going to move, but you just said that those come into estrus only 24 hours, but actually there's 3 periods that they'll come back in. So right. Explain that, because the bucks have been hanging on the does, and then they're looking for them, and they're doing the lip curl, and they're getting the pheromones in their nose, and then they're testing them.
Yeah.
They're scientists. And so once they get the right pheromone, then they're on that doe and they lock her down until she lets her breathe them. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, she'll probably breed with that buck 4 times, maybe a couple more times in that 24 hours. And that's it, man. She's done. These poor bucks, they go through life. That's their whole purpose in life, and they look forward to it so much. And then these goofy does are only in heat for that short period of time, and then she's done. But they don't all go into estrus at the same time or in heat at the same time. There's about a 2-week period during which does in any one area will be in estrus at one time. Like where I hunt, on a square mile, there's probably only 1 to 3 does that will be in estrus on any one day. And the one that's in estrus right now is here, and then the next day, the next one might be a mile or 2 miles or 3 miles away even. And in that case, it'd be a different brown dominant breeding buck over there 3 miles away that'll be taking care of that doe. But this goes on for 2 weeks. And when
does that start?
The further south you go, the later it starts. But except in mid-Texas, their does are in estrus already in October. But here in Minnesota, the beginning of heat in does is triggered by a certain ratio of darkness to sunlight every year. It's the same time. And here in Minnesota, it begins on November 3rd. Now, some people say, oh, it can't be that. I never seen one. Well, that's because not all the does are in estrus. Now, where you're hunting, maybe there's none in heat. And over that way, maybe 300 yards away, there's one in estrus, but you're not there, you see. And so you don't realize it. But it starts on November 3rd, and it's all done by November 17th. And during that period, at first period, about 85% of does will be bred, from yearlings on up in age.
Now, that's in Minnesota, correct? Those are your dates in Minnesota?
Yeah, it'll start later, like if you're down in Georgia or Colorado or wherever, it's going to be later. And I can't tell you exactly when that's going to be. But I can tell you the kind of signs that tell you that it started. Most hunters get all excited and they get out in the woods and they find all kinds of ground scrapes. Oh, man, they're all over the place, antler roots. And they come in and say, boy, are they ever rotten. But if they mean they're fighting, they're dead wrong. All that ground scrape business and making antler rubs, before the November breeding season is not. They're not made to attract does. Everybody thinks they are, but it makes sense that you would think that. But those are made by bucks establishing their breeding ranges. Mature bucks, I don't know if a racial darkness sunlight makes them start doing it then, but usually it coincides with the first days that we started getting frost here at night, certain temperatures. Down in Georgia, when I was down there doing some video work, it seemed that the triggering temperature was 60 degrees at night. But here in Minnesota, it's 32 degrees at night. Then they start, and they're just in a frenzy of marking their ranges like a dog urinating on tree trunks to tell all the other dogs, this is my yard, and this is my place, or the wolves doing that, or whatever. Same kind of deal. But whitetails do more. They don't just pee on things. They also deposit musk odors from their tarsal glands on their hind legs, and musk odors from glands on their foreheads, which they rub on overhanging branches of their ground scrapes and that kind of thing. And this goes on. Now, when all of a sudden you don't find freshly renewed, they renew them every 24 to 48 hours all during this time. And all antler bucks do this at first, but the big dominant bucks finally chase those lesser bucks, the ones he beat in battle during the months before, to establish their picking order. They'll chase them out of there. They got to go live somewhere else for a little while until breeding is over. And anyway, he'll be marching around every 24 to 48 hours, unless the weather's bad or he knows you're there. He'll come back every 24 to 48 hours and paw the ground and put some more urine laced with his tarsal musk on the ground scrape by peeing on his legs, and he'll rub some more of the musk from his forehead on branches overhanging his. So he's got all these extra odors that go along with what you see. So it's visible things, and same with antler rubs at that time. They make these bright antler rubs by rubbing off the outer bark and exposing the inner wood, and you can see those quite a ways away. And then they rub scalp musk on those as well. And so they're doing that. Well, once breeding begins, the big dominant bucks don't really have much time for renewing ground scrapes anymore. And that's how the hunter knows, geez, they're not renewing ground scrapes anymore. That means they're breeding. And they're going to be breeding for 2 weeks. And you won't see many ground scrapes being renewed, except perhaps on these little areas off range where these lesser bucks go, because they'll make ground scrapes and antler rubs all during the period that this breeding is going on, but not within doe ranges. You won't find that going on in doe ranges. And doe ranges are places where there's a lot of doe tracks.
Sure. Let's stop right there, because that's something very important that new hunters and older hunters that haven't really got into the science of the whitetail. And just to reiterate what Dr. Ken just shared is that once the scrapes are not being freshened, that means the bucks are right on the does, and they're going to be harder to find. Talk about where I find those bucks now that, they're, as I call it, lockdown. A lot of people call it, lockdown phase, that they're sitting on that doe just waiting to breed numerous times in that 24 hours. Talk to me about that.
Well, once they're with a doe that's in heat and is releasing that pheromone into the air, they'll stay with that doe. A lot of people, I remember back in the days when we first started doing our research with doe urine containing pheromone, it was not always easy to attract bucks because if a buck was with a doe, he just wouldn't leave that doe for any other doe. Yeah, those other does he smells or thought he smelled would have to go to him rather than him going to them because he's busy with this one doe. But anyway, this, like I said too, this only goes on for that 2-week period of time, and during that time, the very best place to hunt the bucks is where does are feeding. Now we can't, except when we see railroad tracks, we can't tell, if a certain doe is in heat in any one place. But while our scouting and our experience all the years hunting, and this year, every year when we go scouting, my first job is to go find out where all the does are feeding. What we know we've known for years where all the usual feeding areas are, depending on whether the does are eating on grasses and other greens, or they switch to browse, which usually happens in northern Minnesota at the beginning of the second week in November. But we know where they're feeding, whether it's on browse or on graze, and that's where we're going to hunt, because our best odds, unless we see the railroad tracks, of finding a doe in estrus, which will be accompanied by the biggest bucks in our hunting area, the big dominant bucks, that's the place where we're going to find them. And even when they're not breeding, before breeding begins and after breeding begins, the big dominant bucks cruise through their breeding areas quite frequently, and they don't just walk around just to look at the country. They walk around to check on does. And whether, a lot of times we'll take a buck in a doe feeding area simply because the big buck showed up to check on that doe or those does. Maybe 2 or 3 or 4 or even a dozen will share one really good feeding area, like some farmer's alfalfa field or something. Well, that buck all during fall is going to show up pretty regular when those does are there if he's not with a doe in heat, looking for another one in heat. So the very best place then is feeding areas that are frequented by does. When you don't know, if you don't have railroad tracks to rely on, and you don't find those every day in deer hunting. So anyway, that's what we key on, and that's one of our most important things. Aside from finding tracks of big bucks to find out if they're there, where they are and where they live, it doesn't pin them down exactly because they have the largest home ranges of whitetails. They have 1-2 square miles in size, and but those doe feeding areas are really, really important to us. So it's almost like we're hunting does rather than big bucks, but we're hunting does to hunt big bucks.
So hunting does to hunt big bucks. And folks, you're getting a lot of information. I hope you're taking copious notes. That means a whole bunch of notes. And because once the breeding season begins, and you've got to check your areas. Once you know that time period, 10 days, 2 weeks, time period is on. One, you need to be in the woods from daylight to sun goes down, and you need to be observed. But the other thing is, and you heard Ken say it so well, is that you got to react. If you see those railroad tracks as Ken has defined them, then you've got to make sure that you're moving and you're going to where the does are, not where the bucks are. And because if you get to where the does are, Mr. Wonderful will show up, and then that kind of brings us back to blinds and whitetail. We've got about 5 minutes to introduce that. Then we're going to go to part 2 of the show. So Ken, take the next 5 minutes and introduce blinds for whitetails.
Okay, well, I've been making blinds with natural materials for years, and we discovered, like tree stands, whitetails eventually discover them and start avoiding them. If it's done well, you might get some good buck hunting for up to 3 years from a blind made with natural materials, but that's a lot of work. We hunt in big area, we got a big gang, and so this past, a few months ago, I bought my first ground blind from Cabela's, and I'm really anxious to use it because I think, the more I think about it, the more advantages I think you'll get from one of those. For one thing, for us at least, we don't need to search for natural blinds or create blinds where needed using natural uncut materials like fallen branches and trees. We don't have to do that anymore. We got this one blind we can carry around. Mine only weighs 9 pounds, and you can set it up without sound and sit in there. And I'll keep using this tool I made years ago for ground level hunting. But ground level hunting is going to be the new rage in deer hunting. You watch and see. Hunters that are doing this, it's going to spread everywhere, and everybody's going to want one of these little ground blinds that you can buy, made with camouflage material, and there's lots of reasons for that. And one is that you don't have to do other things. You don't have to do a lot of pre-season work, because the way we hunt where there's fresh tracks of big bucks, and we never quite know where that's going to be. And so with this, rather than prepare blinds somewhere and hope we're going to see big bucks there, we go where the bucks are right now. And using this blind we can carry around gives us the advantage of being close to them every half day of a deer hunt. We have to change sites every half day, by the way. But anyway, we can...
Wait a minute. Hold on. You said you change sites every half day. Explain that, and then we're going to wrap up this segment and go to part 2.
Okay, well, the reason we do that is because, as we've learned with our 45 years of research, that older bucks, especially the older bucks, the 3.5 to 6.5-year-olds, almost always find most hunters within 2-3 hours in the morning. However they're hunting, whether they can be hunting on foot or sitting in a tree. There's so many ways they find them now, and they're so sensitive about the things that tell them this is happening. And usually it happens without most hunters realizing it. And if you want to hunt big bucks, the worst thing you can do is just sit in one tree stand the whole season and hope a big buck comes along. That just doesn't work anymore. It worked back in 1970, but not today. And so we move. We move every half day because we've learned that if we didn't see a buck within a half day of hunting after we hunted in the vicinity of where we found its very fresh tracks, he knows you're there, or at least it's a good idea to assume he knows you're there, and so you're not going to see him anymore at that spot. So we look for more fresh tracks, and it doesn't have to be a mile away. 200 yards away. The buck is just keeping out of sight to where he thinks you are. So then he's got to find you all over again. And so we play this game with these big bucks twice a day during the hunting season. And every now and then, they make the mistake. They haven't found you yet, and there he is. He's looking for you, and we get him. Now, it isn't like that on opening weekend, but starting with day 3, that's the cat and mouse game we play with big bucks for the rest of the season. And,
wow. Dr. Ken, we're at the first stop, and ladies and gentlemen, we're getting some great information and eye-opening information, even for this guy who's been chasing whitetails with Dick Rogers in the Bunkhouse crew for over 50 years. outside of along the Baraboo River. Leave it at that. So we're going to take a break, and we'll be right back, and I'll introduce Dr. Ken Norton, part 2.
Make sure you catch part 2 of Dr. Ken Nordberg, and he's going to continue on talking about blinds, railroad tracks, and the impact that their hunting has and will continue to have on the future of the big bucks in their deer camp in northern Minnesota. You're not going to want to miss the show because Dr. Ken keeps rolling on with great ideas and great tips. See you there.
Thanks for joining us. Be sure to tune in tomorrow for another episode of Whitetail Rendezvous, where you can listen and learn from the experts so you can be more successful on your next hunt. Until next time, listen, learn, and succeed.